everybody, Craig Warrack here with episode 4 of my Secret Santa custom project for 2018, in which I'm making the Fantastic Four villain, the Psycho Man. And in the previous episode you would have seen me Frankensteining a lot of different figures together to make this mess you see in front of you here, and in this episode I'm going to be sculpting him so that he looks more like this mess over here. Now normally for sculpting I use an epoxy putty called Milliput, but this time I'm going to be using this epoxy sculpt by Aves. I'm not dissatisfied with Milliput at all, but I just thought I'd try something different, so I'm going to be using this. We'll see how we get on. And I've already been trying it out, so why don't you come and take a look at some of the stuff I've done so far. It's very basic, but let's take a look. So here we go. I've just been familiarising myself with the new epoxy putty. It comes in two parts, the same as Milliput does, and performs much the same as far as I can see so far. What I've been doing is just really sculpting over the sort of structural areas that I just wanted to reinforce before I went any further. That's the collar. Really, I tried to see if I could do some detail, how the epoxy sculpt would handle that, and it seems to do it fine just there on the collar. And sorry, I'm just holding them together because he's not all glued together. And I've also, filled in this the torso joint that I took from the Red Onslaught. I just filled that in, so I just want to see how much range of motion I have, like how far down I have to sculpt to cover up if he leans forward or back, that sort of thing, how much the sculpt will limit if I go side to side. I just want to get all that in place before I start sculpting more detail on top. These hands I have at the moment are just placeholders. I'll likely sculpt some others. This one in particular because he has to hold his control box in his right arm, right hand rather. And yeah, just a lot of sculpting to do. His face is also just a placeholder. So yeah. So let's get to sculpting, and hopefully, if his crotch doesn't let him down, oh dear, this guy will look more like that guy, or some cool version of that guy, by the end of this. So here goes. So I started sculpting at the head, and I really just kept the eyes and mouth of the original figure there as a guideline for where I should sculpt his new features. I'm using rubber tip clay sculpting tools to flatten and shape the epoxy before it cures. Where I need a hard edge, I like to use my hobby knife to cut away pieces of the putty, and you can see me doing that here. I work with small amounts of putty at a time, gradually building up features and details. A lot of my detailed sculpting work is done after the putty hardens and cures. With Psycho Man here, I drew pencil lines on the cured sculpt and then used my knife to carve the detail into it. I find it gives better detail, and the sculpt isn't in danger of being ruined by my fat fingerprint in some soft epoxy as I work on it. Sculpting his chest and arms was quite easy in comparison to sculpting his face. Sculpting his legs was a little bit more difficult. Psycho Man has these kind of trash bag like trousers on, so I really just covered his whole leg in epoxy putty and then used my sculpting tools to score in these horizontal lines, and then I just sort of run it over with the orange paintbrush you see there. So I've lightly wetted that paintbrush, and just by running it over those sculpted lines it just sort of softens it all out. It turns sort of deep crevices into sort of more soft folds in fabric. Now Psycho Man has this sort of frame around his legs. The lower part I can sculpt, but I wanted the upper part sort of stand out, so I got some plastic pipe from a model shop and just cut it into equal lengths. And then I just put a little nick in each of them with my plastic cutters, and I just folded them over on themselves and glued them down, and then glued all 4 of them onto washers that I placed around his legs. Now, Psycho Man also has this tunic that hangs down over his crotch and upper legs, and if that was sculpted, then it would be too brittle and it would just snap when he articulates. So I'm using Procreate here. It's another kind of epoxy putty, and if you mix the black and white parts of it in different ratios, then you can create a more flexible sculpting material. Problem is, Procreate is a nightmare to use. It's kind of like trying to sculpt with bubble gum or something. But I found that by using talcum powder, it was much less likely to stick to itself, and I could roll it out, cut it, and I just found it much easier to work with using that talcum powder trick. And this is the hell that his skirt looked like at my first attempt, but I was able to go back, fill in the gaps, sand it out, and it looked a lot better. I then drew on where his belt should go and sculpted that with Abe's epoxy sculpt. That left only his control box to do with the words fear, doubt and hate on them, so I made this little box out of craft styrene plastic, wrote fear, doubt and hate on the top part, and then carved those words into the cured epoxy that I put on top. Okay, so at this point I think I'm about done with most of the sculpting. Probably a couple of areas I need to clean up, and he isn't fully put together. He's still sort of balancing without his pegs in and that at the moment. But I've also made the box that you've seen here, the control box. And what I'm doing at the moment is I couldn't find a good hand to hold the box, so I've just kind of glued it on to this Marvel Legend Toxin hand that has a nice sort of splayed fingers that I can sort of build on. So I'm going to have to sculpt a new hand that will help him hold this box. And there's still some detail I can add to the box, but I just wanted to get it to this point so that I could then try and get the hand done, and that would be me finish the main figure. So yeah, I'm really happy with how he's turning out actually. So here we go. So I replaced Toxin's fingers with toothpicks essentially, and really I just sort of arranged them around the sides of the box so that they would support and cradle the box, and then really I was going to be sculpting on top of them. They're just there to act as armatures or support for the sculpt that goes on later. So I've decided to put little neodymium magnets, rare earth magnets, in the tips of the fingers, just because I really want some extra stability, and I've added like the magnets also there around the points so that he's going to be able to hold that and it won't just fall out his hand the whole time. I didn't want like a gripping hand. I wanted just it to be resting in his hand, and that sort of gives it a good magnetic pull onto that. So that's working okay so far. And so while that is hardly some of my best sculpting work, it's a bit of a strange shaped hand, it does seem to do the job. Let's just get this, put that in there. Oh, magnets, come on. There we go. So there we go, you can hold that, and that is really the sculpting done. Finally, what a lot of work. It is now the middle of November, so I need to really get cracking on painting. Hopefully this won't take too long though. But yeah, it's been a very challenging journey from this guy being Omega Red and Death's Head 2 to being this, hopefully you can see the Psycho Man here. I'm quite happy with how he's turned out. Okay, so I'm going to get cracking with painting. So thank you very much for joining me in this rather admittedly disjointed sculpting episode of my Secret Santa custom project. I'll see you in the next one when this guy turns green and white, I guess, and we see him finally done. But I'll see you then. Until then though, pour on the power. Bye bye.